Testing, testing. Good morning, Jack. Can you hear me?
I can. You sound great, Skylar. Good morning.
You sound phenomenal.
I have my I have my radio voice on this morning, so I sound like I'm even more full of cow shit than usual.
Jeez. Hey, let's warm up today. This should be another new opening that we do is warming up with some of these advertisements.
Jack, you want to tell us about this one?
Yes, please.
Well,
Please,
thanks,
Jack.
Skylar. Who needs you? I'll just do my own show, except I desperately need you. So anyway, this is a package of what looks like ground beef or ground meat at the beautiful high-end Mill Valley The Good Earth. It's a chain of two wonderful health food stores, but they do serve, meat and stuff as normal stores do, right? And this one caught my eye because as I was just telling Skyward, I'm a fan of package design and graphic design because I'm not a graphic designer or a package designer. And yet this is and this is the Orwellian blend of how well it's made and how I want to eat the packaging. I just love it. Somebody did this retro design. And yet, of course, what it's describing is just kind of horrific. I was going to say beyond words, but I think Skyward's going to have some words too. So Force of Nature is the company. And it's, as you can see, folks, made with 100% grass-fed bison. And it's the ancestral blend, which means it's like a varietal of wine, mixing ground bison. I'm sure that's some part of the animal that they're not saying. The bison liver, taking them at their word. And the best part you don't want to skip, folks, the bison heart. You know, the kind that the Native Americans in the movies eat the heart and then hand it over to Kevin Costner to have a bite. And that's all mixed together. And of course, it's regeneratively sourced. And maybe Skyward can read that font there. It explains what regeneratively sourced is, which is why we're doing this also as the opening for this show, because we're going to get into this, again, this non-science about regenerative ranching.
You too can participate in ancestral practices by supporting our company and purchasing. It's almost like you're biting into the heart and paying tribute to the animal.
Right.
It's funny. Before I read it, I want to say that I didn't know if this was going to be human packaging or a dog food bag, because the dog food has gone this far. Like as soon as grass fed became a thing, everything switched to saying grass fed on it. I mean, it was like, first of all, there's no way. All you did is change the packaging. And secondly, as we'll get into again, and we do every show, grass-fed is not a happy story.
And it's not even, the other thing, I think you have a clip maybe that might get into it, but grass-fed also isn't what you think it is. Meaning people think, oh, it's a cow out on the open range, like in the advertising, all the time eating only grass.
This looks like the plains before European contact. I don't see any development. It's just the bison in the wild. I'm sure that's exactly how this meat was gathered.
And as you were reminding me that you were, I guess, informed by the great George Werthner, who is also one of my teachers, although he doesn't even know it. I don't know if we've ever spoken more than once, but there is no wild bison anymore. Everything that exists is domesticated and messed with the hands of man. And just, like reaching into the gene pool of European cows, which come from water buffalo. That's what bison are today, which is a controlled species, bred semi-confined, they're out in open areas, but not in the picture on this wonderful label of the grass-fed ancestral blend bison.
You may have gone a little bit too far by saying there aren't any. I don't know if he ever said that, but it's they've definitely, the ones in Yellowstone, because of the terrible hunting practices taking place there, are killing ones that would be passing on maternal instincts and things like that. So in a way, that is even domestication. You're taking away the wildness of the animals. And then there is the adoption of ranchers of using bison or crossbreeding the bison. So you get the hardiness of the bison with the other things. So yes, by far and large, bison are not what bison used to be. And I have a very in-depth interview with him, and I think I put it on my ecologist channel, which I'm not so sure I need that one, because almost everything that we talk about, even if it's ethical, ends up coming back to veganism, and even ecology comes back to veganism. You know, if you want to do the right thing for the planet, if you care about nature, if you want to be kinder to animals, most of it comes back to making a more ethical decision about what you eat. And
Yeah.
the crazy thing is, like, and then you get healthier. But the trade-off, Jack, of being healthier is that you have to be kinder to animals and the planet. And that's just bullshit. Who wants to buy into that?
Yeah, it's the one. I mean, I was talking with a friend, Ray Cooper, and I'm always, talking with Leah Wilborn as well, who's in a most wonderful way a hard ass. She doesn't let me get away with anything. Like you just called me out and say, well, are there no wild bison, Jack? But the line I like for me, coming from the environmental side into veganism, it wasn't for ethics. Oddly enough, I didn't want to face the ethics of it. You can't be a meat eating environmentalist, or which is to say, there's a real hypocrisy there, especially cows. I mean, pigs and chickens and all the rest is polluting and unethical, but the cows are the big one. If you eat cow meat, you are really actively participating in the destruction of the atmosphere and global warming and pollution of the oceans and waterways and on and on and on. So call yourself what you will, but there's a contradiction there. And it's also, it's just, we're creatures of habit. And I didn't get into this until my 50s, so I don't judge people for still eating meat, but I will seek to educate and inform people and let them make their own educated decision rather than one based on, like, I don't want to know.
Okay.
Which was me.
Paula says, good morning. And Susan Kirk says, hi. And Paula says, all I have to do is buy something to be inside the ad. It takes you right there, doesn't it? Ray Cooper says, okay, I got it. I'm not sure what that.
Meaning that means, I think, move on. Like, yeah, guys, I got it.
Jack doesn't speak without it being a monologue.
Exactly. And a long one too.
I do want to talk about something you pointed out. The first line is ground bison, followed by bison liver, bison heart. Well, it's all ground and it's all bison, which means that the first line is probably hooves and intestines and just whatever misery they scraped off the floor of the slaughter room. Regeneratively sourced, though, you can forget the horror of it because it was regeneratively sourced.
And then there's an asterisk. It explains what that means to force of nature's definition, because there is no hard definition, by the way, folks, of regenerative anyway. It's just a buzzword at this point, which points to things, but it's not legally required or enforced by the USDA.
Oh, you wanted me to read that, right?
If you can, yeah. I don't have a oh, wait. Actually, I can. I got it. Okay, I have my Inspector Clouseau glass. So force of nature defines holistic regenerative grazing as planned rotational grazing, leaving ground cover, and allowing adequate recovery time between grazing rotations. Sounds nice, right?
Where did the wildlife fit into that?
Yeah, exactly. Not at all.
And what does ancestral blend mean?
I think, Skylar, you cynic, that it's pointing toward how our ancestors, from, in my case, Austria, Hungary, and the Ukraine, as it was called then, used to do. They used to hunt the bison and ground them up into packaged meat patties. And Ray,
just so everyone knows, today we want to continue with the kiss the ground debunking, and if anyone watched last week, we didn't even get through the trailer. Because there was so much to debunk. And we're going to switch things up by taking a listen to Mike the vegan, who debunked regenerative agriculture. He puts in more time and research than we do, which is quite the understatement. So why not listen to somebody far more informed than you and I are, and we can all learn from him together.
Sounds good to me. And good morning, Susan Kirks. Thanks for stopping in.
Do you want to just do it?
Let's just jump in.
I haven't watched this before, so this will be New for me.
Beef, environmentally friendly beef, whatever you want to call it. Hey, it's Mike here, and today, regenerative grazing, eco beef, environmentally friendly beef, whatever you want to call it, we are going to debunk some of the claims around it, and in particular focus on a recent 2020 study on white oak pastures. We're going to look at the carbon-related claims in this study, as well as ones previously made by white oak pastures. We're going to look at things like land use, conflicts of interest, and funding. We're just going to do our due diligence, and I have some help from Dr. Tushar Mehta, who is a data enthusiast who has done a deep dive into this, wrote an article on medium.com, so he will be here helping.
White Oaks Pastures is essentially part of this global infrastructure. They present this real family farm kind of thing, which they use in the movies.
So let's graze the roof, go crazy, learn some graze anatomy, and oh my gosh, I have an affliction. I just want to say I personally know a lot of people who are well-intentioned who have just bought the regenerative grazing thing hook, line, and sinker, and what's not to love about it if you eat beef? It's saying that you can save the planet while eating beef.
Yeah.
Isn't that how I say that at the beginning of every show? I should make a point to. When bottom line of the marketing, is it what you already wanted to hear? Is it allowing you to do what you were already doing and now you can feel good about it? And before we provide any evidence one way or another, ladies and gentlemen, if it's that convenient, it should set off an alarm in your head that it might be too good to be true.
Yeah. And that's, what we have our little share of that in Point Reyes, where they say the land has been damaged. They don't say why. And I'll say it's because of cattle grazing. And then they're going to heal it. The Nature Conservancy in this point, who's kind of the hero, brought in money. But we're going to heal the land by bringing in cattle to graze the land, to heal the land. So as I always say, it's the disease brought in as the cure.
Yeah. Paula says, from a listener's take, I find your analysis, Skylar and Jack, to be really inspiring and informative. Please interrupt your own program as much as possible. Oh, that won't be a problem, I'm sure.
Skylar has a little electric shock collar he's gotten me. He's trying to get it around my neck. So okay, enough, Jack. Stop with the monologue. But thanks, Paula. Very kind. Very indulgent.
They might have seen Alan Savory's TED Talk, who's the poster child of grazing, or poster old South African dude, or just another presentation on some flashy carbon numbers or before and after pictures and thought, this looks great, but they didn't get the full picture. And as we will cover, since that TED Talk by Alan Savory, this school of thought has been adopted as a marketing campaign by some of the largest food companies in existence. And I just want to say, yes, obviously I'm a vegan. I don't support eating animals, but I will say that when I was doing my sustainability degree, I bought into the Alan Savory thing. It was actually taught as a part of my degree. And even after being vegan for a few years, I just looked at it as, oh yeah, that's a more eco way to eat meat. Not much different than how chicken has a lower carbon footprint than beef does. But obviously I was like, oh, ethically, I don't support the eating of any animals. But what eventually shifted my perspective was the science showing that the claims made about these grazing techniques are just not correct. And of course, now we are looking at the newer generation of these claims. So let's go. That brings us to this.
Isn't that interesting? People get offended that we are motivated by compassion or that we change, we're not from some evil planet where we're just trying to disrupt the current economy. We're trying to improve, and other people are just making excuses not to improve. And therefore you turn a blind eye to the punishment of the planet, the punishment of the animals, the subsidies that you, the taxpayers, are paying for all of this. But if you set all of that aside, aren't you upset by being lied to? You should be upset by being lied to.
By the way, I just align with that. Jan Liebond has just joined us, first time ever on the show. He writes, we all crave good news about our bad habits. Motivated reasoning and confirmation bias are powerful forces. Jan is a kick-ass, mature, meaning over 50, barely, environmental activist. I met at a veg fest up at Sonoma County and become friends since. And also, good morning, Chris Cedar, a kick-ass vegan activist who is part of the efforts to help the elk at Point Reyes. Good morning, guys.
And I have a little side story to tell. You remember, of course, us debunking hooves on the ground, wings in the sky. I'm going to be putting out a video today in which like there's a plaque saying, hey, you can see this animal do this here. You can see this animal do this here. And before my walk was over, you know, the little nature plaques.
Yeah.
You can see a white-crowned sparrow doing this, etc. I saw it. Not only did I see it, I got it on camera. And Hooves on the Ground had a production team on hundreds of acres of land and couldn't get one shot of what they claimed to be true because it's not habitat.
Meaning they were touring a small organic farm, of cow farm,
claiming that it was bird habitat and wildlife habitat, and couldn't get one example. Not
so
one.
while they're walking around with cameras, they couldn't find any of the animals they said were all over the place in this healthy place, which was not healthy, of course, because they were running cattle on it, which becomes a monoculture. I'm repeating what you say, Skyward. That's what I do.
This paper in the journal Frontiers Sustainability subjournal is from late 2020, and it looked at white oak pastures, which they abbreviate as WAP, not to be confused with WAP, W-A-P. Children, if you don't know what I'm talking about, just ask Cardi B. Now for some of the basics of the studies, I'm going to go over to Dr. Tushar Mehta, who is one of the co-founders of plantbaseddata.org, which will be linked below. Here he is.
If we look at the baseline characteristics of the white oaks pastures, they're just very basic. Is that they're 3,000 acre farm with mainly cattle, chickens, and pigs. There's some other animals too, but minority. It started on an area that's very degraded by prior peanut cotton farming and things like that. So it's using very degraded land, and we know that if you use degraded land to start with, you can then store more carbon in that land as you sort of bring it back up closer to a baseline.
So for the regenerative grazing sort of sequence, they start by adding compost, which is worth noting, and then they implement Alan Savory's holistic planned grazing, which is intensive rotational grazing with a host of other principles. So this video also should act as a response.
For those who don't know, Alan Savory is the devil.
There you go. There's a nice unbiased overview.
I won't be happy unless he ends his life hanging from a cross being flayed.
So there's what we would call, what I would call the bad cop. Shame on you, Skyward. Shame on you for hating a man who is responsible for killing millions of animals and harming lots of people on the planet. And I'll play the good cop and say he's a gentlemanly South African rancher who was a ranger, who, for me, the unforgivable sin that should deplatform him, not necessarily kill the man, deplatform him. And I pulled up the article here. This is an article, if you look up Alan Savory, A-L-L-A-N, Alan Savory elephants, you get this headline, and this is true. I have done research on this. This quote, this man shot 40,000 elephants, this is in Africa where he lives, before he figured out that herds of cows can save the planet. Ecologist Alan Savory blamed elephant herds for destroying African grasslands. It turns out what all grasslands need to survive is more animals eating them, meaning don't kill the elephants for destroying. So he single-handedly led a movement to try to prove his theory, which is elephants were harming African lands, and he presided over an ongoing campaign to kill 40,000 elephants, and then like, oops, I was wrong, sorry.
Yeah, you don't get to say, oops, I was wrong, sorry, and then make a living.
Right. So that's Skyward's. That's where Skyward's.
Here's the vegan part of me, the connected to animals part. The elephants are very family oriented, multi generations. You know, the grandparents, the parents, the children, the grandchildren. They don't. It's not I crap out a baby and then they go and do what animals do. No, the multi generations of families slaughtered because somebody showed up to a place he doesn't belong and decided that he knows better. And this is what humans do wherever we go. And this is why I include the correcting God's mistakes line in a lot of the videos that I do. The arrogance, it's not just the arrogance, but the arrogance of continuing to always be wrong and walk around as if we're always right is a little bit mind-blowing. Mistake after mistake after mistake. And here's a guy who not only made that mistake, but now is making a living despite that mistake and miseducating the entire planet. He is evil.
So this picture here is of Alan Savory at a TED Talk, which he's famous for now, which is he's kind of the father of the regenerative ranching movement. So now his new big idea, after decimating, as Skyware put very poignantly, an intelligent, highly intelligent species, far more sensitive than we humans are, in my opinion, too. Now he's pushing regenerative ranching, which is heal the land by putting more domesticated cattle on the land, not for their own sake, not to set them free and let them run wild, but domesticated cattle for human consumption, which is, if anybody watched this show, it's obviously a monstrously destructive force on the planet, perhaps the greatest destructive force, unnecessary. And this guy is kind of given new life to the trade, saying, oh, we can do it to heal the land. Just like he said, we need to remove elephants to heal the land. Wrong again, Alan. So he's still at his, Skyward would put it, the work of the devil.
You know what's really twisted is on my ecology channel, YouTube's always feeding me these regenerative promotion videos. And it's gone to the point where human beings are going to deserts and saying, look, we can take this worthless land and grow human food here. And what they're missing entirely is that a desert is an actual ecosystem. Like it's one of several ecosystems that exist and that you learn about if you go to school and learn about nature. And a desert isn't for you to say, oh, I don't think that that's valuable, and I'm going to turn it into something else, which of course can only be accomplished by stealing water from another location and taking it to this place that you're going to transform. But what I find really twisted is that that's exactly what Savory said about elephants and supposedly learned from it. Oh God, look what Alan Savory, look what elephants did to this area of Africa, which was apparently, he's referring to a desert area or a tundra area, and he didn't approve of it. Let's change it. We still, despite that mistake, and because of the regenerative movement, have people going out and transforming ecosystems. And just because you are so disconnected from the planet that you don't understand what wildlife live there doesn't mean that wildlife don't live there. In fact, they evolved to live there and are shockingly magnificent animals because of the fact that they can live in deserts. And you think it's your job to steal water from somewhere else and grow human food where they lived.
Yeah. It's one of the ongoing repeating, I will make a point to put it in every show, is we believe that the earth and its ecosystems and its magnificent non-human animals don't need humans. We, for the most part, do great damage to, and we're here and we're going to stay and we're not going away because we're 8 billion strong now. But this whole idea of managing the land, to help the land, to heal the land, to regenerate the land, that humans are necessary for that process, utter nonsense. And for the most part, not all of it, I have to watch myself with hyperbole, but we are a largely destructive force in the planet. And we really don't have to be, to the extent that we are. And the first thing, folks, is, obviously give up eating animals for one, for all sorts of reasons, and live lighter on the planet.
Shall we continue?
Sure.
By the way, quite interesting. I'm sure they left this part out, that they take land that was already destroyed from another human extractive process.
That's actually what when he gives this TED Talk, he shows pictures of Africa, of plains that were, degraded land. And I don't remember I know that he was showing pictures of healed land which weren't taken in the same spot. It was, and also misrepresents, like as they say here with Mike the Vegan's example, we're going to heal the land. We're going to bring in inputs, which can be, food or crops or hay to feed animals. And we bring in water, and now we're healing the land. Well, that's not a closed loop. Fine, go do that. But Mike goes into the detail of showing how even the so-called studies and tests are they're not what they say they are. They're bogus. They're bringing in inputs, and then they take the animals out anyway. So it's not a closed system. It's an extractive industry again.
Right. Well, with the white oaks thing, they was talking about, it was cotton farming or something like that. And then,
I forget which plant it was. Yeah, which was degraded by, the typical industrial plant farming, and then they're going to heal it. But anyway, he'll continue here.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, really quick.
Yeah.
Where urban sprawl is taking place in California, and it's growing at an alarming rate, in the manner that the regenerative grazing places are taking degraded land and then trying to regenerate them. The other side of that is that you have the degraded land from ranching, that is so depleted that now it's like, oh, well, this is primed for development. It's almost, I mean, it's nearly pavement already. It's so degraded.
To Savory's methods, which are supposed to save the world. We'll see. So we have a pretty large operation here with a ton of different animals that started on degraded land. So what are the results after 20 years in terms of maybe land use and carbon savings?
And the claims they make is that they're, eco-friendly, and that they use 2.5 times the land for their animals as compared to conventional farming of the same animals, grouping them together, and 66% less carbon than regular animal agriculture, the comparison group that they're using.
So they say they use 66% less carbon than conventional systems. And I find that really interesting, which brings me to their previous 2019 report that I really briefly responded to in a Joe Rogan, Chris Kresser video, where they actually claimed that their beef was carbon negative. I just think it's funny that the moment these numbers have to make into a peer-reviewed journal, they go from being negative to, maybe just a third as much as a conventional system. Going to challenge that 66% figure with the carbon in a bit, but it's worth mentioning that 2019 report was by Qantas, which is a sustainability consulting firm, so it was commissioned by the company. And as Tushar and his co-author mentioned in their article, Qantas is pretty questionable, makes things questionable because in their previously commissioned reports by Nestle, they concluded that allowing water bottles in national...
Do people have any idea how evil Nestle is?
Yeah, probably. They've been around a while.
Parks was ecologically all right. As your guide, I welcome you to Glacier National Park. Hey, don't you mean Glacier National Park? Now, common mistake, the park was purchased by Glacier, the beverage company owned by Coca-Cola. So what you're looking at is actually a solid wall of used plastic water bottles. Anyway, moving on. But you might be thinking, oh, Qantas, yeah, that was like a less reputable report, but this is a totally different study, unconnected. Well, it turns out the main author of that Qantas report is also an author of this Frontier study in 2020. And there's some other details about the authors, as Tushar mentions.
People who were the academics behind the study appear in movies like Sacred Cow and connect right back to Alan Savory. And then just within a few minutes later, their McDonald's and other chains are posting their things about eco meat. So it's kind of like a coordinated industry, multi-level sort of effort, it seems.
Sacred Cow is a pro-grazing documentary, and I don't want this to be enough to dismiss everything. We want to dismiss this on the actual paper, but it's also worth mentioning right up front the financial conflicts of interest, and that brings me to how this whole thing was funded entirely by General Mills.
Yes, well, it's 100% funded by General Mills.
But it's a mill. It's just milling plants.
It's just milling plants. Fortunately, they're milling everything. So they're like a multinational food company worth billions of dollars, and this is like a tiny thing for them to actually fund this study. The majority of the cattle meat that comes from White Oaks pastures is bought by General Mills for one of their eco products.
And General Mills does own Epic Provisions, and that is a meat company which is branded as if you're just hopping off your wagon on the Oregon Trail to grab some local jerky. What could be more eco than that? Well, technically, dying of dysentery would lower your emissions, but we're not trying to die. We're just trying to be more eco. All right, now let's take a closer look at what is probably the most important subject here, and that is the carbon situation. Especially in the documentaries and the presentations, there's this notion that there's some magical quality to grazing that leads to this extra sequestration that wouldn't occur if those animals weren't on the land. Like, large mammals are required, completely ignoring that there were, for example, no native large mammals in New Zealand, yet its ecosystem was able to form just fine. So if there are any issues here, what are they? Well, the first has to do with those other animals that happen to be on the farm besides the cows.
But indeed, there's an external factor that they admit using, that is using 10,000 pounds of hay per acre when they're sort of...
That's really interesting, subtle points to be made in there. Are animals needed on the land, and which animals, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Meaning right now, of course, the beef industry is saying, well, we need to put cows in the land to heal it, which obviously is self-serving for profit. And yet I try to be objective. I really do. We argue as folks who want to see wild elk grazing at Point Reyes Seashore that wild elk grazing do help the land. So I'm making the opposite argument, which is elk heal the land and help the land. But I would say they're not necessary, but that they're a wild animal that is evolved to be integrated into the landscape and doesn't do harm, as opposed to European highly overbred cattle for profit, are no longer a wild animal nor allowed to behave like one, even in these rotational grazing situations.
Well,
It's
I'm
still a
gonna
manipulated animal, extractive, taken off the land. The body doesn't stay and decay in the land. So again, it's subtle stuff though. To get this across to the consumer is tough because we're in the weeds now, as they say.
I'm gonna at least correct what might be misinterpreted there. The elk were there prior to European contact. They were reintroduced. It's not like they were strangers that were added to it. So the evolution
Right.
is still there in some way.
Very good. Very
But
good.
but the land itself got transformed by the ranchers. So bringing the elk back to land that had been destroyed by the cattle and the ranchers did put the elk in an unfamiliar situation until it started to heal, which, by the way, the only places in Point Reyes National Seashore where you can see things that resemble native habitat are where ranching doesn't take place and hasn't taken place for a long time.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. A key point.
And
If
which
you
is
go-
why I still framed here, because ranchers talk about providing habitat and that they work in harmony with nature, and yet they'll turn around and contradict themselves, as Bill Nyman did, saying, oh, when I saw the native plants coming back, I just couldn't keep my silence anymore and had to sue, because what you're looking at, those cattle eating, is what the ranchers want. And by the way, that's the nicest version. You're not going to find pure grass like that in Point Reyes. You find all kinds of thistles and nasty crap. But ladies and gentlemen, if you consider how many species of animals there are, how could that monoculture of grass be the right habitat for all of them? You need a mosaic of different plants. You need a variety of landscape to support different species. Now, if that doesn't mean that you won't see them there, but that's just because they didn't commit suicide and give up. I mean, they're using what they have. But that exists. That is nothing but food for cattle. And yes, you will find some animals trying to live there. But does that not strike you as extremely limited in terms of being called habitat?
Yeah, and this is, I'm not sure what part of the country this clip is from. I'm guessing it's not from California. And when we're talking Point Reyes Seashore, we're speaking specifically Northern California, north of San Francisco, on the coast as well. So there's a unique habitat there. By the way, I just want to read Jan's comment. I want to ask you a question. Absolutely. So Jan wrote, strange that the regenerative crowd says you have to take cows off the land to allow it to recover. And that actually, I question that, Jan. Is that what you meant to say? And then you continue, recover, ? Consider the blatant irony in this statement versus their claims of using cows to heal the land. So they do make the statement that they need cows to heal the land, but your first statement, I don't understand, Jan. Strange that the regenerative crowd says you have to take cows off the land to allow it to recover. For me, they say we need to, this is what we're hearing from the Nature Conservancy specifically right now, which is cows, we're going to graze cattle to keep the grass down. Of course, it's European grass like we're seeing in this picture that will grow long, and it's an annual, so it's going to die out and become a more of a fire hazard. Although for me, that's such a nettle right there, because fire for me is a good thing. I'm not trying to constantly put out fires and prevent them from happening, which is now the clarion call of all the agencies, like fire bad. We need to stop fire and set fires to stop fires and masticate to cut fires and down trees.
I think Jan was referring to the rotational grazing where.
Oh, thank you.
So,
got it.
Right. So if cattle were so good for the land, you wouldn't have to force them out of the area before they completely destroy it.
Thank you. Got it. Thank you. And there you go, Jan. Thank you, Skyward. You just saved Jan having to write that. Meaning they move them around to let the land recover from the cows being on the land. Wow, yet, you're right. That's a contradiction right there. Wow.
It is.
Which means you have to force them to move because they've been bred to stand still, unlike elk who have evolved to be constantly on the move. As I was taught, they're I was going to say grouser grazers. Browser grazers, constantly on the move. Yeah, and clarification. Yeah, thank you, Jan. But Skyward, cow grazing degrades the land. Exactly.
There's so much to talk about right there. Just the ecological connection that is missing entirely from the cattle and that wildlife have, which I know it would make people uncomfortable if I were to say that wildlife consciously say, hey, I've eaten here enough, I'd better move on. They don't have to. It's inside of them. thousands and thousands of years of the land managing to survive with the animals has led to animals not destroying their own habitat. Non-human animals, I should say.
Yeah, right. We breed the wild out of the animal, make it domesticated like us, and then they do damage to the environment just like us humans do.
I've had the pleasure of seeing it happen with the plants I've reintroduced. With some of the native plants I've reintroduced, I've actually found some signs of feeding upon, let's say, a blue fescue, for example. But the plant itself is not destroyed. And I keep watching it. And I'm like, okay, is this hungry animal going to come back and finish the plant off? No, it got something, and then it let the plant
Recover.
have plenty by which to recover. Does anyone? Yeah.
And Ray Cooper puts it very simply. He says the regenerative argument actually validates the opposite view, which is a reiteration of what Jan was saying, and you clarified for me, which is we need to move the cows around so the land recovers, which proves that they're damaging land in the first place if humans weren't constantly like push them, because if they stand still, they're going to do damage. And this is the beauty of discussions like this, where I just got another nuance of understanding of the inherent contradiction in the regenerative argument.
And I'm going to say this every show. I'm going to, at least make people understand that I know I'm being redundant, but isn't it a little bit strange that these ranchers will preach to the world that their connection with the land and their multi-generational experience is why they know so well what to do, and yet we also have these ranchers coming on these shows and acting like it's an epiphany to do what they should have already been doing? Well, which one is it? How can this be an epiphany?
Right. In other words, they say we've got this new great way to heal the land then that contradicts the fact that they, for multi-generations, 4 or 5 generations, well, then if you didn't do this new method you just came up with 5 or 10 years ago, that means all the rest of the time you were degrading the land, right? Right? Would you admit that? No. Never.
No, I think about my redneck cousin in Missouri who always said this stuff. I don't need a book. We know what no one knows better than what we're doing, and actually go so far as to clown education. And I'm not going to say that being educated means that you know what you're doing either. It depends who educated you.
Yeah, and as I'm just, again, to repeat, I'm benefiting from hearing you and then other folks making a comment. So I still have a lot to learn always, but I guess we're also encouraging people to do their own. Well,
which part is brilliant, Paula? Please feed our egos.
Oh, please, no, go, don't do that.
The biggest factor here, as it always is with cows, is methane, and I mentioned this in almost every video on the topic, but oftentimes proponents of grazing go to that 100-year global warming potential, or just looking at the warming that happens within a 100-year time span based off different greenhouse gases.
So methane is accounted in 100-year timescales as opposed to 20-year timescales. In many cases, it's better to account it over 20 years because the half-life of methane is very short.
That 100-year time span puts methane in at about 32 times more powerful of a greenhouse gas than CO2, but then when you're cranking it down to that 20-year time frame, which is most relevant here, we're talking about 86 times more powerful than CO2. So looking to their chart, if their initial number is assumed to be correct, that 7.2 million kilograms of CO2 equivalent per year jumps up to about 19 million kilograms of CO2 equivalent per year. Ouch. So let's put that.
Yeah, that's a lot to digest there. I struggle with this a lot, but
I'll simplify it because we learned about it when I went back to school. Methane retains the heat for a longer period of time. It makes the actual overall effect of the atmosphere trapping and heat much more damaging than CO2. But a presentation that I did, and it's in like an hour-long video, so I think people probably didn't even pick up on this, because some of the meat eaters that I know that I tried to talk sense into want to talk about, oh, you drive a car and you should be worried about CO2, and I'm more worried about lowering CO2 emissions. Well, in this presentation that I did, I found that conveniently, when comparing the effect of the livestock industry on emissions, they did not include the vehicles used for the livestock industry. They lumped that into damage being caused by the transportation sector. But the number of vehicles in the livestock industry that I was looking up when I made that presentation is significant. And these are massive vehicles. And also the distance that they are transporting these goods, these products, not to mention the vehicles being used on site, all left out of the equation.
Just analogous to that, at Point Reyes, our little local example, never factored into the damage that cow grazing is doing at Point Reyes National Seashore National Park is all the trucks that come in and out of there bringing water and hay and bringing out milk. These big, heavy industrial trucks, probably the biggest things in the park, bigger than Winnebago's.
There's 18-wheelers going through there.
And gravels and tractors in the roads. And you can see at the ranches where there's the most vehicular traffic in and out of all the ranches, the roads get chopped up and then they have to be repaved. And it's just
pay for.
Which is paid for exactly by the public. So all this stuff, I mean, when Strauss goes on, Albert Strauss, the organic dairy farmer god, goes on what I call his, oh, poor me victim tour. None of this stuff is mentioned. It's we heal the land. We're doing this wonderful thing. It's lies, 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 lies. And that's why we'll keep harping on it, because it kind of is a battle of repetition. People go into a grocery store and they're just assaulted with regenerative, great, good, eco. I mean, all the jargon that we talk about all the time, all the humane washing and all the eco green washing. It's just an assault. So people really need to get educated to know how to read labels and understand.
Another overarching theme here is just the lack of desire to simply do the right thing, because as Strauss, etc., will do, they'll say, "Oh, well, look at the steps we're taking to be kinder to the planet by now we're going to harvest kelp and seaweed and feed that to the cows because the methane emissions are reduced a little bit. How about if you just stop hurting the planet? God damn it!"
Oh God! Just to tuck on that, so this is a supplemental feed extracted from the ocean. It's not bad enough to degrade the land and pollute the atmosphere. We've left something out. What else can we screw up? I know we'll rake the ocean for plant life from the ocean, which is, of course, a damaging extractive process. Dry that, in another industrial process, make it into something to feed supplementally the terrestrial cow. Yeah. Because that, folks, will reduce the methane emissions from the enteric digestion of cows. And I don't even know whether, they, of course, as always, claim it's 50% reduced emissions when studies by like Mike the Vegan, who tracks this stuff down, God bless him. Well, it's like a 10% or 20% at most drop in methane emissions. But is that worth all the production carbon emissions to produce that stuff? And of course, as I would say, rape the ocean. Like, it's just such a nightmare. Just drop it, folks. Let it go.
How much of this is as simple as out of sight, out of mind? Because the life of the ocean is under the surface. Like, oh, there's something we can fuck up without really having to think about it.
Skyward, profound. I mean, you say stuff very compactly, succinctly, and I'm going on these monologues as you put it correctly. But as I'm doing just now, out of sight, out of mind. That's the name of a friggin' show. I began my advocacy, as you know, in the ocean with sharks, etc. And there's a lot of the out of sight, out of mind there. And this would be an interesting topic for a show in the future. Fishing seems to be praised and looked at this wonderful, again, Orwellian grandpa and grandson activity. And I've reached the point to where I wonder if it isn't even nastier than hunting. And I think hunting is disgusting. But with fishing, you're even more disconnected from the harm that you're causing. Like the fact that you're sitting on a boat, relaxing, having a beer while hell is being wreaked upon whatever you've hooked underneath your boat. The disconnect is alarming. It's an interesting topic. I know a bunch of.
It's a fish. It's a fish, and we humans are so smart that we know that things that don't look like us don't have feelings. So I guess I should just shut up.
No, it's actually, God, fishing is a whole nother deep and important topic. I know a bunch of environmental activists who care, and they grew up fishing, and they really don't want to give it up. And I don't really pick on them because it's industrial fishing that does the damage to the oceans on a much bigger scale than some guy going to a pond and pulling out a bass or something. But to your point, and you're making the ethical arguments which would make Leah proud, which is just, can you put yourself in the shoes of a fish, what that experience is like? And, that takes a degree of sensitivity and willingness to go there. And even as I say that, I'm aware of like the macho guys watching this saying they're talking about the feelings of fish. Are these guys kidding? That's the dominant culture view, which is just to discount the feelings of anything that isn't human, let alone fish, God forbid. Yeah, and that brings me back to my childhood where I was taught by my father to fish, and how I had feelings about it, but I followed my dad's lead, who was not a hunter, but he went fishing, and just the brutality of it, and I'm supposed to be inured to it.
Well, I would start telling some childhood stories about watching the fish suffer, but we're supposed to be doing Mike the Vegan, so we'll go back. We'll be a little bit disciplined here.
Got 19 million up against their sequestration, which is about 2,290 kilograms of carbon per hectare. Multiply that by about 1,200 hectares, and then you need to multiply that by 3.7 to turn the carbon into CO2. That's 10.3 million kilograms of CO2 sequestered, but we have about an additional 11.7 million due to the methane over 20 years to add to the total farm emissions. So instead of being 13 million, like they say, there actually would be closer to 25 million. So instead of just emitting a measly 3 million kilograms of CO2, the reality is that they're 5 times higher than that at nearly 15 kilograms.
Who's this gonna have?
I'm really.
I mean, listen, it's great that he's showing that they're improperly reporting, but most people don't give the slightest shit about this part.
Well, let's just talk about this for a moment. For me, I'm glad that Mike the Vegan does this, data mining. It's really important. But I do totally agree. I don't think this stuff it's not effective on me. I trust Mike. I've listened to him enough and met him in person that I trust the guy. I would trust his research, but this takes you into the area where the industry will do stuff like this. They'll put up false data, and they have a ton more money to hire even universities, academicians, to create false data or bogus data. It's done all the time. So I don't think this is the strongest argument, even though I need this stuff to go on for sure. I glaze over. So I can't imagine the average person who's not into this stuff doesn't glaze over with this information.
Right.
What's the solution about that? And Paula, better yet, thank you for your fish are so beautiful, and people celebrate their abundance while hunting them to extinction.
I'm gonna resist. I've got so much, me as the ocean guy. I have a lot to say on that.
The CO2 equivalents per year totally destroyed. This further emphasizes that the claim of carbon negative beef that they had in their 2019 Qantas report is just complete and total nonsense. Especially, they said that it was more eco than a Beyond Burger or even straight soybeans, which are super low on.
Boy, Marty, you got me with this one.
Go for it. I was reading it too. Read Marty. Read it. Go.
I just, there might be something to your statement that I should be happy about, but I also think it just shows how humans think everything is their right to treat how they want to, and that now animals should be thankful that the horror we're inflicting upon them is lesser to some extent. Like, I think like the worst part of the fishing process is the being caught part. And I had to learn this again with the sharks, because you have scientists that exploit the shit out of the ocean and end up doing exactly what fishermen do, and end up learning, I don't know why a scientist had to learn this, that the post-traumatic effects of the catch process led to the animal dying anyway. Well, of course it did. And even if what was done to the animal during that traumatic process wasn't enough to kill it later, you've also drastically reduced its ability to survive in the wild. You just fought it to mortal exhaustion, probably broke its jaw, or at least greatly damaged its jaw. I gotta tell you, Jack, how hard it is to get shark footage without the shark having a broken jaw nowadays. But
why is that? Why is getting footage?
Huh?
You said it's hard to get footage, to get footage of sharks without breaking the shark's jaw?
Without the shark having a broken jaw. I want the
I see. You're filming a shark who has a broken jaw. Got it.
Yeah.
Right.
So imagine like you're exhausted and in the ocean, and everything else in the ocean is looking for food, and they have the instincts that say, "Oh, I detect weakness." Like that animal's screwed. Good, you released it right into the jaws of another animal.
So Paula just made a comment that I want to address because I'm going back to my childhood. But so Paula asks, fundamentally, does catch and release do harm? And that's because Marty said, unlike hunting, at least fishing provides the opportunity to catch and release. And Marty, yeah, I agree that you can catch and release in fishing, so it's better than hunting, which the point is to kill, period, always. However, here's my experience with catch and release fishing, which I've done my share of as a child. So to Skywar's point, the bluegill sunny that I caught by mistake when I was going for the pike or the pickerel or the smallmouth or ideally the largemouth bass I was fishing in eastern lakes, it's fighting for its life. I'm pulling it up out of the water. It's asphyxiating and thrashing around, so you either have a chance to throw it into a bucket if you're going to keep it, or it will die slowly, so you're going to eat it, or you can, beat it on the bottom of the boat so it's stunned and almost dead. And in your case, you're saying there's the option of I can take the hook out of its mouth, which I've done, and put it back in the water. I have the oil of the fish in my hands, unless you're really cool, which I've never seen anyone do, is put gloves on so you don't take the oil off the fish, which it needs, in the water. And then there's the damage of the hook. A cut in the lip, a cut in the side of the mouth, which it can recover from, and some do live. So I'll be very precise here. It's not absolutist, but the experience that Sky was talking about, God bless him, is a horrific one. And what do I get from that experience? I'm not going to eat the fish now. I just I caught that fish. Wow. And I did this. I'm not criticizing you or anyone. I'm just saying, what is that experience? I'm asking, what do I gain by pulling that fish out of the water? I got him. I did this thing that my ancestors did, talk about ancestral, and now I'm releasing it because I don't want to kill. I don't need to eat it. I'm not going to eat fish anymore as a vegan now, but I'm talking about my childhood. And then that's the best outcome. Here's what I remember, and the number of fish that swallowed the hook, and I tried to get the hook out because I want to release the thing. And there's a fish disengorger. It's a foot-long piece of plastic, and you push it down the line and push the hook to try to push it back in to unhook it. And of course, it's barbed, and that's if you're not using a treble hook. And the number of fish they were damaged and bleeding when I put them back in the water, and they're kind of stunned and they swim off like this. Maybe they're going to live, maybe not. I remember feeling badly then, but not enough to stop the practice. And now I'm letting myself feel that. Why the hell would I ever do that again? I didn't know any better, and no one was there to teach me and saying, look at that animal, Jack, feel what you're feeling. Why would you do that to a fish? You're not an Eskimo.
You were being taught the opposite, because I'm sure your first instinct was similar to mine, looking at the fish struggling for air in a bucket and thinking, this is pretty messed up. And then having the adults reassure you that you should ignore those sorts of thoughts.
And feelings, ignore the feelings, especially as a man. I mean, even showing tears right now is just inappropriate. You wuss.
I'm ashamed of you.
Yeah, I mean, I know better, but it's just like what we're taught. I'm in my 60s now, so I understand this stuff. But as a kid, a 12, 13-year-old,
you're probably crying. You're probably crying from a sense of shame.
Well, it's part of it. Disgust, sadness, the whole picture, not just mine, but all of it.
Because the best excuse I could come up with for continuing to do it was the challenge. It was entertainment of, oh, here's a living target that I can try to subdue. It's humans conquering.
And, it's so tricky. I just think of the friends I know who are my age-ish, and they still like to go, I don't know, hunters, I guess, personally. One turkey hunter down in the South, but he grew up in Louisiana, so that's his tradition. So we're taught this stuff young, and it's hard to let it go. We're taught this stuff so young, and it becomes our childhood, our memories, our family. If I reject it, I'm rejecting my mom and my dad who loved me, that, or my dad in my case. It's tough stuff. We get really damaged and traumatized so early.
Think of, as Ray is sort of alluding to here, we just have this sliding scale of, as long as we start up here with how badly we treat something, then we can say that we're being good by doing anything else, such as the hook release thing that you shove down into the stomach of the animal. Like, I mean, that's the kind part. All you have to do is put yourself in the position of the creature that you're talking about to set the stage. Now, of course, people with the superiority complex that our species has gets very upset when I suggest that we should compare ourselves to a fish or anything that is not a human being. But at a minimum, it sets the stage for how shitty what you're doing is, because you would never want it done to you. When I was campaigning against these exploitive guys that were using research permits to go game hunt great white sharks, the people that were against them would say things like, well, how would you like to get hooked and drugged behind a car for an hour, and then at the end of it, somebody tags you, pats you on the back and says, go get back to life. I'm like, well, I'm almost dead, thank you. And the sharks don't get to go to hospitals, fish don't get to, none of the animals get to go to the hospitals, which brings me to terrestrial hunting. I think that there is catch and release with hunting, not just in fishing, and they call it tagging. And it's supposedly a good thing, but you traumatize the animal, you hunt it down, you shoot it from a helicopter or maybe from an ATV or something like that, and the animal loses consciousness, stumbles, maybe breaks a leg, maybe doesn't, and then an hour or so later has to, after you're done putting a tag on it or whatever, has to figure out what the fuck happened and try and find its way back to its babies in its den that probably were now consumed by an animal that was waiting for the opportunity. But this was a kindness, because we humans want to satisfy some mundane detail or write a research paper, but certainly never actually end up helping the animal.
Yeah, the amount of people in academia that work with animals I mean, anyway, it's a whole other nettle. I want to read a comment here by Robin Wedford. It's new to me, to the show, so thank you for coming. My grandmother would have made sure you ate that fish, even at 5 years old, period. NDNs, I don't know what that stands for. You gotta love them, huh? Meaning, I don't know whether it's sort of, you hunted it so you're going to finish eating it, or that is a kind of love because that's the, the ancestral Native American way where you, and again, I'm not picking Native Americans for this. There was a completely different world, completely different ecosystem. Hunting, subsistence hunting is not what we humans do in modern society. So different, but
well, let's say this. I doubt that Native Americans wasted time catch and releasing.
Right. And again, I go back to the question I'm asking myself, like, I did that. I would catch and release. And it was, I'll answer it as I ask the question. It was my way of, God, communing with nature, being quiet on a boat, on a lake, not in the water, as you pointed out, kind of above and separate, which is what a perfect metaphor for humans, above and separate. And then I would pull something out like, oh, life. Wow. I'm excited. I'm alive. Of course, by me almost killing the living thing that I'm excited to be part of. Same with a hunter in camouflage, lying in the autumn foliage and being quiet like an animal to hunt the animal. It's a longing to be connected to nature, as well as, ancestral connections and what my pappy taught me to do. But it's all that, and yet not objectively looking at, God, the damage and the damage I'm doing and the suffering I'm causing in another sentient being.
Well, we don't know how to be connected to nature anymore, and you end up doing another example of it, hoping to be connected to nature because of that thing inside of you that desires it, is becoming a marine biologist or something like that, because your parents took you to a SeaWorld show and you were blown away by the creatures that you saw there, but you're also misguided into thinking, well, what the way to be with these animals is to participate in imprisoning them.
I grew up in the 60s in New York, and I was taken to, no joke, the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey circus that came to the New York City area. And, there's a whole memory right there, but that was my first exposure to wild animals, and as well as in the Central Park Zoo. And that I remember, these magnificent big creatures in these metal cages pacing back and forth. I didn't come away with a happy memory, but I didn't know what to make of it as a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old. And by the way, I do lead. It's funny. I was yesterday talking to people, inviting them on my giant coast redwoods trip, where I have people leave their phones behind for several days among not even animals, although we see some, but it's just to be among giant coast redwoods to appreciate being around ancient, living, stationary, other than wind motion, trees, and to feel a tree, or to literally, as I was joking with a friend, have you ever make fun of Jack the tree hugger, but actually hugged a tree and just held on to a big old tree for like 5 or 10 or 15 minutes of stillness and breathing, and just see what happens. Feel what that's like. The vast majority of humans have never had that experience. So that's a pitch for the experience of not Jack talking so much, but inviting people out to be silent among ancient trees on a giant Coast Redwoods trip.
This desire to have purpose. It's always been a driving theme in my films. And I just think humans have lost whatever purpose we were once meant to have. But I want to go back to the Native Americans sport fishing. They were actually living their lives busy being alive, not having to seek some form of recreational entertainment. They behaved more like the rest of the planet, which I would call more connected to the planet. And again, I can't prove that nobody did that, but I just can't imagine that you had enough time in your day or your life when you were busy just trying to survive to say, well, this will be entertaining. I'll spend a few hours hunting something that I'm not going to use.
Yeah, well, that's a mouthful, Skylar. I mean, most of us are taught to spend, at least I'll speak for American society and Western society, the one I was raised in. We are supposed to spend a lot of time doing something that doesn't provide meaning to us to get the money to then go spend some time, whether it's a weekend or a vacation or retirement. Later, we'll do something that gives us meaning. And the lucky ones are the ones who, I mean, as environmental activists, I won't speak for you, but for me, I struggle financially with it, but I love what I do. It feels like I'm doing something not feels like. I know I'm doing something that has meaning for me, and hopefully for other people as well.
Marty, and well, this goes for everybody, but I hope you won't feel shut down when you provide a comment like that, and it provides a great talking opportunity. And I can be a little bit come off as harsh, but I've thought about all of these thoughts for so many years that I just jump straight into what my reaction is, that I've learned over time. And I had a uncle pass away, and my cousin sent me his memorial image, and it's him holding a fish hanging from a hook, and the line underneath says, "Love to mow the church lawn and deliver lasagna and fish." And I can't say the things that come out of my mouth or that are in my mind, because I'm like, wow, that's all horrifying. That's all terrible. So he gave people food that they shouldn't be eating, that is full of misery and torture, did one of the most wasteful resource practices that there are, which is to maintain a lawn, and fished. One of the most disconnected forms of torturing animals that I can think of. And this is why I don't have any friends.
Well, you have a few vegan friends, my friend. And speaking of which, if you want to make more vegan friends, and I guess especially for people watching right now, as well as people who might watch this later, but this coming Sunday, June 1st in San Francisco, which is National Animal Rights Day, NARD. We're doing a gathering in San Francisco at the United Nations Plaza at 1 o'clock, from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock, but be there at 1 for some talks. And actually, Leah just jumped on, and she'll be giving a talk as the farmed animal campaigner for In Defense of Animals and a vegan in her own right. And there'll be, I don't know whether it's going to be 50 people or 150 people, but fellow vegans and future vegans and wannabe vegans will do a march. Will
we have the old women from the Humane Society getting up and telling everyone to cut organs out of their pets as soon as possible, like last time?
I don't even want to ask what that is, so let me finish, and then we can go there if you want to, or whether that was just a quip. But it's 1 to 3 this Sunday. It's on my events page, treespiritproject.com/events. And then I'm also gathering people afterwards to go for a vegan meal together at a nearby vegan cafe called Radish.
I may be able to attend.
That would be great to see you there, obviously. And I really want to do a bull session afterwards. There's going to be a lot of cool people there. Mike Rapenna, who runs the Anonymous the Voiceless chapter in San Francisco, for people who want to learn about that. He's a cool dude, sweet guy who helped carry Elkwater. And Will Tuttle, World Peace Diet author. Ray Cooper is good. Oh, that's right, Ray Cooper. Let me do a plug for you. Ray Cooper is a vegan activist of a sort and a connector of people who lives in Petaluma. He makes world peace chocolate. which is vegan chocolate. And he will be bringing free samples to reward the crowd of vegans who show up. You may not have friends, but you'll get some free chocolate, Skylar.
All right. So Ray will be there. And I'm kidding. I know who my friends are, but it's a lot harder now. It is.
Yeah.
Because I don't keep, I'm tired of, and this will tie in perfectly with Leah's comment, and then we'll end the show. I am tired of coddling the most intelligent species by having to shut my mouth and allow them to spew out their lies that help them continue to do things that they shouldn't be doing. And the only reason that they are able to continue forward is by lying to themselves. Like, you are actually lying to yourself. And you're the most intelligent species. You're using your brain to manipulate your own brain out of selfishness. And like, the fish feel pain, end of argument. Well, people will say that Leah is ridiculous for saying fish feel pain. And before we even provide the studies that show that fish do feel pain, what do you have, human beings, in terms of evidence that fish don't feel pain, other than your desire to believe that they don't?
You know, I've never, I guess I haven't had the displeasure yet, the odd experience of meeting someone in front of me who says, I don't believe fish feel pain. I've never had to deal with that one. I hear it all the time, but I've never dealt with that. For me, that's so easily dealt with and dismissed. It's just, it's so absurd in the face of it. You know, when I pulled those fish out of the pond or the lakes as a kid, and the thing is flopping around, desperate. I mean, I trust my instincts as a human being, you know, some sort of sentient being, even though I'm human, to say that fish is in distress because I've taken it out of its environment. And I know it's in distress because if I just keep watching it for 5 minutes, it's going to die. So whether it feels pain or not the way I do, it's clearly in distress. And I don't need science to prove that. It's like, I don't need to drink a bucket of swill. The animals don't feel pain the way we do to know that that's a bucket of swill. At some point, common sense, my God, I don't need a study to tell me that water is wet or that animals feel pain.
Well, that's where our studies have fallen to these days. We had studies. They've done a study that, in order to try and explain why people feel good after going to the ocean. I'm not lying.
I know. Oh, God.
They did a study to show that prey experience stress being hunted by predators. Really? You thought that was a pleasant experience?
Or what my cortisol levels will do when I go into a forest and I'm quiet and off of my Facebook Messenger app. Why does that make me feel good? I need a study to prove this, versus it's not that complicated.
How about those monsters at UC Davis that need to study whether or not it's traumatic for a baby to be taken from its mother, who take monkeys and pull the babies out of their arms? And this is happening at UC Davis. Fuck all of you.
It reminds me again. I've mentioned this twice before, and I'll keep mentioning it because it was kind of a trauma for me. It was a seminal moment where I was walking in the forest with, I don't know, about 17 or 18 forester types and ecologists and people who work for agencies that benefit from doing management projects, which is to say cutting down trees and destroying plants. And they have fancy words for it, like restoration and clearing and thinning. And they were all talking about, they were pointing in this gorgeous forest at Tomales Bay State Park, which I talk about all the time and will continue to do so, and saying how they're going to improve it and fix it and heal it with machine tools and chemicals. And I was just, I just didn't know what to say. And I was, you know, with two other people who were on my side. Everybody else is the opposition, the folks who want to kill and manage, or killing as management, were just lost in their concepts and their heads, and they're not with the life that is in the forest teeming around them. Couldn't see it, couldn't feel it. And not that they couldn't. I mean, if I said, hey guys, and here's $100 just to be quiet, they say, oh great, thank you, pay us for $100, we'll do a forest meditation. But their dominant thing was to be in their head, thinking about killing in the future to fix the life that they were walking through the Garden of Eden and saying, hey, they would kill it to approve it. A Garden of Eden on Earth, right here, right now in 2025, with all this destruction, they couldn't see what was right in front of them. And worse, not seeing it is one thing, not feeling it another. They're proposing the destruction of it. And that's where I get, like you, Skylar, and get really angry and go really nuts and say, no, I'm going to, in 2 weeks, for those people, there's going to be a demonstration about this event, which is 2 Saturdays from now on June 7th. Contact me if you're interested in participating in Marin County. No.
You make me think of all the activists that I've lost to science. And that's not to say that science isn't good, but they get in their heads and they forget why they became scientists in the first place, because it then just becomes about proving their numbers, and they stop thinking about the creatures that motivated them to study the science in the first place.
It's the heart, the feeling is trained out of them, right? As they focus on the analytical, which of course has its value. That's why it's tricky. It's like a doctor who's staring at the machines rather than the patient in the bed. Well, the machines have value and they give you data, and they're essential, I would argue, but not if you also don't look at the human being on the bed. It's both.
We go back to human purpose, and it ends up being about earning money. By the time you spend your 8 years in school, if you get your master's or then go on to get your doctoral,
PhD.
then you pretty much are now a slave to the grind of getting your next grant or some sort of funding. And that becomes more important than what you got into it for in the first place. And now we're starting a whole nother show yet again. we're 11 minutes over, so we'll cut it. And once again, we spent a couple of minutes on what we were supposed to talk about. We're going to change the name of the show to Vegan Ranting.
No. Vegan Rambling and Ranting.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We're here every Tuesday, 9 a.m. Jan says, just hate it when people, including scientists, say, quote, well, ethical considerations aside. And he says, why do we put those ethical considerations aside? Exactly. Like, just putting aside for a moment that we're torturing all the world's animals. Why would I do that? Why am I doing that? And the answer, Jan, of course, as you know, is, well, you're quote unquote meeting people where they are, because they're not in the world of ethical considerations. They've been shut down to that for quite a while, necessarily, right? But to your point, yes.
Jack, I have an ecology channel. I have a shark channel. I have this channel. And I got to ask, I get stuck not posting anything because I'm like, where does this belong? Because Shark Week had a clip that was so horrifying. I'll end today's show on this really horrifying image.
Thank you.
Of these scientists that pulled up a deep sea shark to measure it, and its babies come, flopping out of it on the deck of the boat. And they're like, oh, wow, look at this. And I'm like, that's called spontaneous abortion, because the mother thinks that she's dying and prematurely gives birth. And you fucking people are on TV acting like it's cool. And these are our scientists, Jack. Yeah. What you're doing to the animal is so bad that it has gone to its last lengths to try and keep her babies alive because she believes she's dying. And that's what our scientists do.
That's such a perfect metaphor in so many ways, Skylar.
And with that, everybody have a great day.
Welcome to the world of veganism. Once you open your heart up to this stuff, there is a lot more pain, but I'd also say a lot more appreciation and love. And I was taught that in therapy years ago. Like, I would argue with the guy and say, look, Mr. Therapist, I want to feel all the good stuff and all the joy and all the love, but I don't want to feel any of the pain. And he would just say, New Yorker, like, it's not the way it works. It's good luck with that, Jack. It doesn't work that way.
Just be thankful, everyone, that you're not in my head 24 hours.
Well, ask women who've given birth, about the joys of this world and the pain of this world, and usually
and with that I am definitely cutting us.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. So Skywar's all his films and rantings and love are available at Watching Humans channel on YouTube. I'm Jack of the Tree Spirit Project, so treespiritproject.com or treespiritproject.org. Take your pick. They lead to the same place, and I've got a vegan/elk/ Cal Fire is the forest issue, and podcasts for this show is posted here as well. And yeah, Chris, heartbreaking indeed. Thank you, Skyward, for who you are and for showing up.